Let me be very clear about one thing before this story goes any further. I meant to do it. I want that on the record. I want it stated plainly, without ambiguity, because what comes after this moment is going to look a lot like consequence, and I refuse to be the woman who accidentally stumbled into the worst decision of her adult life. I made a choice. I planted my feet, I calculated the angle, and I drove my forehead directly into the nose of a man who, as I would discover approximately 4 seconds later, runs the most feared criminal organization in South Korea. Intentional, fully, 0 regrets at the time, several regrets immediately after. The sound it made was not dignified. There is nothing dignified about the crack of cartilage at close range. It is wet and sharp and loud in a way that seems to silence everything around it, which is exactly what happened. The music stopped. Not faded, not wound down, stopped. Like God himself reached over and hit pause on Seoul's Thursday night and said, "Let's see where this goes." The man, Shin Jae-won, though I did not know that yet, I was still in the blissful early phase of not knowing that, stumbled back exactly 1 step. 1. This is a man who is built like an architectural decision, a man who looks like someone sat down with a pencil and said, "What if a wall had cheekbones?" And he moved back 1 step, blinked twice, and looked at me the way my laptop looks when I've asked it to run too many programs, like I was a problem it hadn't been designed to process. My forehead, for the record, was in agony. I did not show this. I have a law degree, 2 bar certifications, and 11 months of practicing in a country where I have to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously, so I have developed what I consider to be a world-class poker face. My eyes were watering slightly. I chose to interpret this as allergies. A single drop of blood appeared at the base of his nostril. It moved slowly, thoughtfully, almost, tracked the ridge of his lip like it was in absolutely no hurry because it lived in Shin Jae-won's face, and nothing in Shin Jae-won's face was apparently afraid of anything. It reached the corner of his mouth. He raised 2 fingers, touched it, looked at his fingertips, and then, and this is important, this is the part that should have been my cue to leave at a sprint, he brought those fingers to his mouth and tasted it, not wiped it, tasted it, like a man sampling wine he hadn't expected to enjoy. Then he looked at me and he smiled, and I want to be precise when I say this was not a normal smile. This was the smile of a man whose entire personality just recalibrated around a new piece of information. A slow, private, terrifying smile that started at his mouth and ended somewhere behind his eyes where I could not follow it. "You," he said, his voice low enough that I felt it more than heard it, "did that deliberately." "The exit was blocked," I said, which was true. He had been standing directly in the middle of the only corridor between me and the door, and I had asked him twice to move, politely the first time, less politely the second, and he had looked at me the way people look at hold music, present but unengaged. So, forehead, bridge of nose, basic geometry. "I've had people try to kill me," he said with the thoughtful air of a man making a pros and cons list, "with guns, knives, a Bentley." He paused. "No one has ever headbutted me." "Guns and knives are illegal," I said. "I'm a lawyer. I have standards." He stared at me. I stared back. Behind me, someone made a sound. A small, strangled sound, the kind that comes out of a person when they are watching a mouse walk up to a cat and ask it to move. I turned around. There were 12 men stationed at intervals down the corridor. Dark clothing, dark expressions, the collective energy of people who handle problems professionally and were currently watching their employer bleed onto his collar because of a 5'8" American woman in a burgundy wrap dress. One of them had his hand inside his jacket. 3 of them had gone the specific pale color of men whose entire job description had just been violated. And every single one of them was looking at Shin Jae-won, waiting. I turned back to Shin Jae-won. He still hadn't looked at them. He was still looking at me, with that expression that belonged somewhere between fascinated and genuinely inconvenienced. His collar had a dark stain now. His suit, I noticed, probably cost more than my rent. His rent. Possibly an entire building. "What's your name?" he said. "Camille Hayes." It came out before I could stop it. I have since had significant time to reflect on why I volunteered this information to a man I had just assaulted, and the most honest answer is that I was raised by a woman who said always be polite with such frequency that it has apparently overridden my survival instincts entirely. "Thanks, Mom," he said my name once, quietly, like he was memorizing it. "You're American," he said. "You're observant," I said. "You're in the private corridor of a members-only establishment," he said, "bleeding slightly from your hairline. Having just broken my nose." I touched my hairline. There was, in fact, a small cut there. My forehead had come off worse in this exchange than I had initially accounted for. I lowered my hand before he could see me wince. "I wasn't aware it was private," I said. "There was no sign. There's never a sign. That's a significant accessibility issue." He blinked, slowly, the way people blink when they are recalibrating what kind of conversation they are in. "The exit," I said, nodding past him. "I still need it." He looked at me for one more long moment, that steady, measuring look that I would come to recognize as the expression he wore when he was deciding whether a thing was an obstacle or an opportunity. And then he stepped aside, a single, deliberate, unhurried step. When he held one arm out in a gesture that somehow managed to be both courteous and deeply threatening, the way a door held open by the wrong person always feels like a trap. I walked past him. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck like a brand. I made it through the door, into the cold Seoul night, down the steps, onto the pavement where real people were living their regular lives, blissfully unaware that I had just committed what was probably some form of assault on a man whose name made entire rooms rearrange themselves. I made it half a block. My phone rang. Unknown number, Seoul area code. I stared at it with the specific dread of a person who already knows exactly who is calling and has absolutely no defense prepared. I answered it. Because again, "Mom, always be polite. This is entirely your fault." Silence. Then his voice. He's unhurried, slightly nasal now for reasons I was personally responsible for. "My nose," said Shin Jae-won, "is broken." "I know," I said. "I have very good bone density." A pause. "My doctor," he said, "says it will need to be reset." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" I considered this seriously. "Professionally, yes. Personally, I'm still processing." Another pause, longer this time. I stood on the pavement with Seoul moving around me, taxi horns, the smell of street food from the Pojangmacha on the corner, a couple arguing cheerfully outside the convenience store, and waited for whatever was about to happen to my life. "I need a lawyer," he said. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It burst out of me the way things do when the situation has officially exceeded your brain's ability to treat it with appropriate gravity. "Oh, you're calling me." "Yes, the woman who just broke your nose." "Intentionally, you said." "I did say that." "That," said Shin Jae-won, "is exactly why I'm calling you. My company is under investigation by the Financial Crimes Unit. I've had 3 lawyers. None of them have the Constitution for it." Another pause, and I swear I could hear the smile in it, sitting there in his voice like it owned the place. "You headbutted me and then told me I have an accessibility problem. I think you might be exactly what I need." "What you need," I said, "is an ice pack." "I have 17 of those. I need you in my office. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. "I have a job," I said. "Lim and Associates." He said it immediately, casually, the way you say a fact you looked up before you needed it. "You lost the Park So-yeon case this afternoon." "Oh, 4th floor courtroom, Judge Baek presiding." "You argued well. The verdict was wrong. I watched the live stream." My stomach dropped approximately 6 inches. "You watched my case," I said flatly. "I watch many things." "That's not alarming at all." 8 a.m., Camille. Camille. And just like that, my name was in his mouth again, sitting there like it had already been unpacked and made comfortable. "I'll have a car outside your building." "You don't know where I live." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. "Good night," said Shin Jae-won, and hung up. I stood on the pavement for a full 30 seconds. A woman walked past me walking a very small dog. The dog looked up at me. I looked at the dog. Neither of us had anything useful to offer the other. I pulled up my contacts, found my colleague Min Seo, who had been in Seoul for 6 years and knew everyone worth knowing and twice as many people who weren't. She picked up on the second ring. "Shin Jae-won," I said without preamble. "Tell me everything." The silence on her end was a different quality entirely from his. His had been comfortable. Hers was the silence of a person who has just been handed information they weren't sure what to do with. "Camille," she said carefully, "why are you saying that name?" "Because I need context." "Why do you need context about—" She stopped. When she started again, her voice had dropped an entire octave. "What did you do?" "I may have had a minor physical altercation with him." "A what?" "It was brief, very targeted." "Camille." "He's fine, mostly." "Camille." "His nose is a little—" "Oh my God." Min Seo's voice had taken on the flat, a distant quality of a person watching a natural disaster from a safe distance and realizing it isn't actually that safe. "Oh my God, you didn't." "I want to be very clear that he was blocking the exit and I asked him twice. He runs the Shin organization. Camille, the Shin organization. Construction, finance, shipping, and, quietly, half of everything that moves through this city without a paper trail. Oh, he has never lost a case. He has never lost anything. 3 of his former lawyers retired suddenly to locations nobody could confirm. You—" She made a sound I can only describe as someone trying to swallow their own panic. "You headbutted him." "Intentionally," I said. The silence stretched out long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "He called me," I added. "Oh, he wants to hire me." Min Seo said a word in Korean I hadn't learned yet. Based on her tone, it was not complimentary. "And you said?" I looked down the street. The Pojang matcha cart was still steaming. The couple outside the convenience store had resolved their argument and were now sharing a bag of chips. Seoul at night smelled like sesame and car exhaust and the faint green bite of autumn coming in cold off the Han River. "I haven't said anything yet," I said. "Good. Say no. Say it in English, say it in Korean, say it in interpretive dance if you have to. Say no, delete his number, and never go back to that club." "Right," I said. "Promise me." "Absolutely," I said. I went home. I made tea I didn't drink. Or I sat on my couch and stared at my ceiling and had a very stern internal conversation with myself about professional boundaries, personal safety, and the importance of not making decisions based on the fact that the most dangerous man in Seoul had said my name like it was something worth keeping. I set my alarm for 6:30. I told myself it was because I always woke up early. At 7 a.m. sharp, a black car appeared outside my building. I was already downstairs. In my defense, I had my briefcase. I was wearing my best courtroom blazer. I looked completely professional and completely in control, and not at all like a woman who had spent half the night lying awake thinking about a smile that started at a man's mouth and ended somewhere she couldn't quite locate. The driver didn't speak. The car smelled of leather and something faintly cedar dark and expensive. We moved through morning Seoul in silence, past the Han River glittering cold and silver in the early light, past the glass towers of Gangnam standing in their own reflections, until we pulled up to a building that was the architectural equivalent of a person who never raises their voice because they've never needed to. I got out. I straightened my blazer. I looked up at 42 floors of black glass and told myself, very firmly, that I was here because it was an interesting case. The receptionist on the ground floor was expecting me. She led me to a private elevator. The elevator opened directly into a corner office on the 38th floor, all floor-to-ceiling glass, Seoul spread out below it like a map someone had lit on fire. Shin Jae-won was standing at the window with his back to me. He was wearing a different suit. dark charcoal impeccably cut, like someone had tailored it from the idea of authority. There was a small white medical strip across the bridge of his nose. He turned when he heard me. His eyes went straight to my hairline, to the small, neat bandage I had placed over the cut before I left home. Then they came down to my face. That expression again, measuring, still, with something underneath it that I was increasingly convinced was amusement, though it wore amusement the way a knife wears a sheath. "You came," he said. "I had questions about the case," I said. "Of course." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." "I'm not a dog," I said pleasantly, and sat. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. The strip on his nose shifted slightly with it. He walked to his desk, set a file in front of me, thick, tabbed, the kind of file that represented years of something. He sat across from me and folded his hands and looked at me with those dark, steady eyes, and in the cool morning light of a 38th floor office with all of Seoul behind him, he was, I noted with extreme professional detachment, completely unreasonable to look at. I opened the file. "The Financial Crimes Unit," I said, "has been building this for how long?" 3 years. "And your previous counsel?" "Retired," he said. Suddenly. I looked up. He looked back. Neither of us acknowledged the obvious. "I'll need full access," I said. "Every document, every transaction, every communication flagged in the investigation. No filtering, no curating. If it exists, I see it." Agreed. "And if I find something I don't like?" "You will," he said simply. "The question is whether you can work with it." I held his gaze. He held mine. The city glittered 38 floors below us like it was watching. "One more condition," I said. "Name it." "You stay out of my way. You don't instruct me, you don't override me, and you don't send cars to my building without prior arrangement." I paused. "Also, how did you get my address?" "I know many things," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, with the serenity of a man who has never once in his life felt the need to justify himself. "It isn't." I stared at him. He waited. Completely comfortable, completely still, slightly infuriatingly beautiful in that severe architectural way, with a medical strip on his nose that I had personally caused. "Fine," I said, and looked back down at the file. "Let's talk about what you've allegedly done." "Allegedly," he repeated, and this time the smile was more definite, sitting right there on his mouth, unhidden, directed entirely at me. "I like you, Camille Hayes." "I headbutted you 12 hours ago." "Yes," said Shin Jae-won. "That's why." I would like to say that I spent the next 3 days being a consummate professional. I would like to say that, deeply, with my whole chest. What actually happened is that I spent the next 3 days in a glass-walled conference room on the 36th floor of the Shin Organization building, surrounded by 11 boxes of financial documents, 2 junior associates who looked at me with the specific expression of people who had been told to cooperate fully and were cooperating fully while also being absolutely terrified, and the persistent awareness that somewhere 2 floors above me, Shin Jae-won was going about the business of running an empire and periodically, for reasons I refused to examine, thinking about me. I knew he was thinking about me because of the coffee. The first morning, a woman arrived at the conference room door at exactly 9 a.m. with a tray. On the tray was a coffee, an Americano, black, no sugar, and a small card that said in very clean handwriting, "You look like a black coffee person." J.W. I looked at the coffee for a long moment. I am, in fact, a black coffee person. This was irritating. I drank the coffee. I told myself this was purely practical. Caffeine is a professional necessity. Accepting coffee from a client does not mean anything. Lawyers accept things from clients all the time. Pens, bottled water, the occasional fruit basket. The second morning, the coffee came with a note that said, "You left the building at 11:47 last night. Go home earlier." J.W. I stared at this note for considerably longer than the first one. Then I wrote on the back of it, "Monitoring my schedule is not part of our professional arrangement. Also, this coffee is cold. and sent it back up with the associate. 20 minutes later, a fresh coffee arrived. The new note said, "Better?" I did not respond to this one. I did not need to encourage him. I was here to review financial documentation and build a defense strategy. So not to have a note-passing situation with a man who had a medical strip on his nose because of me and seemed to consider this a point in my favor rather than against it. The file, once I got into it properly, was genuinely interesting. I say this as a woman who finds financial crime documents the way other people find thrillers. The Shin organization's paper trail was a masterclass in what I could only describe as aggressively suggestive ambiguity. Every transaction that the Financial Crimes Unit had flagged was technically, defensibly, infuriatingly legal. On paper, the Shin organization was a very enthusiastic and diversified holding company with a remarkable appetite for construction, logistics, and what the filings described as cultural investment. What it was not, on paper, was anything the FCU could pin down. This, I said on day 2, pointing at a transaction record for a company called Brightstone Cultural Holdings, is either a legitimate arts patronage fund or the most creatively laundered 40 million won I have ever seen in my professional life. The junior associate, the braver of the two, a young man named Park Jun-ho, who had apparently decided that since I'd headbutted his employer and survived, I was probably safe, looked at me with the careful expression of someone who had been instructed not to have opinions. "I couldn't say," he said. "No," I agreed. "You couldn't. That's very much the point." I wrote 7 pages of notes that afternoon. I was just beginning to develop what I considered a genuinely elegant legal strategy, one that would neutralize the FCU's strongest arguments before they even reached the courtroom, when the conference room door opened and Shin Jae-won walked in. Not knocked and entered. Just entered. Like rooms were pre-approved for him by default. He was in another suit, navy this time, with a faint chalk stripe that should not have worked and worked anyway. The strip on his nose was smaller today, healing, I noted, before I could tell myself I hadn't noticed. He looked at the 11 boxes of documents, at the 7 pages of notes, at the color-coded timeline I had stuck to the glass wall with removable tape, and then at me. "You rearrange the room," he said. "The original layout was inefficient," I said. "The boxes were stacked chronologically by filing date rather than by relevance to the investigation. I reorganized by exposure level." I went back to my notes. "You can leave. It's my building. It's my conference room until this case is resolved, contractually." I had, in fact, put this in writing during our initial agreement because I had anticipated exactly this energy. "Did you need something? Or did you come down here to supervise your own defense, which I explicitly told you not to do?" He walked to the glass wall and looked at my timeline. "Brightstone," he said. "Is a problem," I said. "Brightstone," he said, "is my mother's charity." I put my pen down. I looked at him. He was still looking at the timeline, his hands in his pockets, and his expression neutral in that particular way that meant something was happening underneath it that he wasn't prepared to surface yet. "Your mother," I said slowly, "runs a 40 million won arts foundation. She likes ceramics." 40 million won worth? "She likes ceramics very much." He turned from the wall. "She's 71 years old and she has a studio in Bukchon and she has nothing to do with the investigation." I looked at him. "The FCU doesn't know that." "I know that." "That's not how evidence works," I said. "What the FCU has is a transaction that looks, to any reasonable outside observer, like money moving from a flagged account through a shell entity. What we need is documentation. Your mother's foundation. Is it properly registered, audited annually? Does it have a board?" "She has a board." "Are the board members—" "Her ceramics students," he said. "Average age 74. I closed my eyes briefly. "Right," I said. "Okay, I need to meet her." The silence that followed had a very specific texture. Not uncomfortable. Surprised, which on Shin Jae-won's face was barely perceptible. Just a slight recalibration around the eyes, a fractional pause before his next breath. "You want to meet my mother," he said. "I want to meet the director of Brightstone Cultural Holdings," I said. Who happens to be your mother? It's a professional visit. I need to assess the documentation situation before the FCU does. She'll feed you, he said, with the tone of a man issuing a warning. I've survived worse. She'll ask you personal questions. I'm a lawyer. I deflect personal questions for a living. He looked at me steadily. She'll like you, he said, and somehow this came out sounding like the most dangerous item on the list. I picked my pen back up. Saturday, I said, if that works for her schedule. Her schedule is ceramics on Tuesday and Thursday, mahjong on Friday, and judging her neighbors on every other available day. Saturday is fine. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. He looked back at me over his shoulder. Camille. I did not look up from my notes. What? You have document dust on your face. I kept my eyes on the page. Thank you. It's... He made a vague gesture near his own cheek. Here and here. Thank you, I said again, in the tone of someone who is absolutely not going to touch their face until he leaves the room. He left. I immediately checked my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. There was, in fact, document dust on my face, 2 small gray smudges exactly where he'd indicated. I cleaned them off and went back to work, and absolutely did not sit there for 30 seconds thinking about the fact that he'd noticed. Saturday arrived with the particular determination of days you haven't fully agreed to. The car came at 10. Different car this time, not the sleek black thing from Thursday morning, but something slightly less aggressively corporate. Jae-won was already in it. This was new information that I received while getting into the car, when I had already committed to the motion of sitting down and could not reverse it with any dignity. He was in the passenger seat. Dark jacket, no tie, a level of casual that sat on him like it had been professionally installed. He looked like a man who had decided to be unfairly attractive on a Saturday morning as a personal hobby. You're in the car, I said. Observant, he said. My own word, returned without ceremony. I didn't know you'd be in the car. It's my mother. I thought this was a professional visit. It is. He looked out the window as the car pulled into traffic. She also specifically asked me to come. She said, and I'm translating this accurately, that she wasn't going to be interrogated by a foreign lawyer without her son present. A pause. She then asked if you were pretty. I stared at his profile. What did you say? He said nothing. He continued to look out the window with the serenity of a man who has left a very deliberate grenade on the floor and stepped back to watch. What did you say? I repeated. I said you were my lawyer. That's not an answer to the question she asked. No, he agreed, pleasantly. It isn't. I faced forward. Outside, Seoul scrolled past, the leafy quiet of a Saturday morning, the streets emptier than weekdays, a man walking a dog the size of a small sofa, a grandmother pulling a wheeled cart with the focused energy of someone on a critical mission. For what it's worth, I said after a moment, fully professionally as a statement of factual record. You also didn't answer when I asked how you got my address. I didn't, he agreed. Does that bother you? Not answering questions? He turned from the window then and looked at me directly, and there it was again. That expression I still hadn't fully catalogued, the one that lived between calculating and quietly delighted. Does it bother you when I don't? Yes, I said. Good, he said, and looked back out the window. I turned to look out my own window and made the private decision that Shin Jae-won was one of the most irritating people I had ever met, and that this assessment had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he was also, empirically, structured like someone's extremely dangerous answered prayer. Shin Jae-won's mother lived in Bukchon Hanak village, in a house that had been in the family for 3 generations and looked like it knew this and was proud of it. The roof curved with elegant authority. The wooden gate was old and worn smooth, the kind of worn that comes from 100 years of hands. The garden visible through the gap was immaculate, pruned with the specific precision of someone who views gardening as a non-negotiable daily argument with nature that they intend to win. Shin Yeon-ja was waiting in the courtyard. She was, as advertised, 71. She was also approximately 5'1", dressed in a pale blue hanbok with small embroidered flowers at the collar, with Jae-won's exact bone structure miniaturized and arranged into a face that was currently examining me with an alert, cheerful thoroughness that reminded me uncomfortably of a customs official. She said something in Korean, fast, directed at me, a complete sentence, eyebrows raised. I looked at Jae-won. "She says you're taller than she expected," he said. "Tell her I get that a lot." He translated. She responded. "She says tall women have strong opinions," he said. "She approves." "Tell her I'm here about the foundation paperwork," he translated. She looked at the folder under my arm, said something dismissive, and then turned and walked toward the house with the absolute confidence of a woman who had already decided how this visit was going to go and was simply implementing it. "She says the paperwork can wait," Jae-won said. "Lunch first." "I told you," he said, and followed his mother inside. Lunch was not a small affair. Lunch was the kind of meal that announces itself with heat and smell from 2 rooms away. Doenjang jjigae simmering low and deep, the sweet char of galbi on the grill, 3 types of kimchi arranged with what I can only call architectural intention, japchae glossy with sesame, a pot of rice that had been timed to finish exactly when we sat down. Shin Jae-won moved between the kitchen and the low table with the efficiency of a woman who had cooked for intimidating people her entire life and had never once considered being intimidated back. I sat at the table. Jae-won sat across from me. His knees did not fit comfortably under the low table, and he adjusted with the long-suffering patience of a very tall person in a space designed for someone considerably less tall, and for reasons I am not prepared to fully defend. I found this quietly hilarious. "Don't," he said without looking up. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was going to ask about the foundation," I said innocently. His mother set a bowl of rice in front of me, patted my hand with both of hers, and said something warm and declarative. "She says eat first, talk later," Jae-won said. "In this house, that's law." "More law than you," I said. Something crossed his face. Quickly, there and gone, that looked startlingly like genuine fondness. "Considerably," he said. I ate. The food was extraordinary in the way that home cooking is extraordinary. Not showy, just deeply, specifically good, the kind of meal that tastes like someone made it for you personally and knew what you needed. I ate more than I planned to. Shin Jae-won watched me eat with visible satisfaction and refilled my bowl before I could object. After lunch, she brought out the ceramics. This had not been on my agenda. "She wants to show you the studio," Jae-won said, with the expression of a man who had predicted this and felt no obligation to have prevented it. "I'm here about Brightstone." "Studio first," he said. "That's also law." The studio was a small room off the courtyard, warm and clay-smelling and absolutely filled with ceramics. Bowls, vases, small sculptural pieces, some finished and glazed, some still raw and waiting. They covered every surface in a gentle, organized chaos that was nothing like the obsessive order of the garden. Here, Shin Jae-won was clearly in a different mode entirely. She picked up a small bowl and placed it in my hands, saying something. "She wants to know what you think," Jae-won said from the doorway. I looked at the bowl. It was celadon glazed, small enough to sit in one palm with a slightly uneven rim that looked accidental but wasn't. The irregularity was deliberate, controlled, the mark of someone who understood that perfection was less interesting than the almost perfect. It had the weight of something real. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. He translated. His mother looked at me sharply, then said something. "She says most people say that," he said. "But you looked at it first. She likes that." Shin Jae-won took the bowl back, set it down, and then picked up another piece. A taller vase, elegant and slightly severe, and held it out toward her son with an expression I didn't need translated. She said something short. Jae-won went very still. What did she say?" I asked. A pause. "She said the vase reminded her of me when I was younger," he said carefully. "Before." "Before what?" He looked at the vase in his mother's hands. Something moved across his face. Not the guarded thing I had come to expect, not the dry amusement he wore like a second suit, but something older and quieter that sat behind all of it like a room he didn't usually open. "Before my father died," he said, "and I took over." The studio was quiet. Outside, a bird moved through the garden. Shin Jae-won set the vase down gently and looked at her son with the specific expression of a mother who has watched someone she loves carry something heavy for a very long time. She said one more thing quietly. Jae-won didn't translate immediately. "What did she say?" I asked again, softer this time. He looked at me. Those dark, still eyes, the medical strip on his nose, smaller now, almost gone. "She said," he began, and then paused, and something shifted in his jaw. "She said it's good that I finally found someone worth bleeding for." I had absolutely no professional response to that. I looked at the Celadon bowl on the shelf. He looked at the floor. His mother looked at both of us with the serene, infuriating satisfaction of a woman who has just done exactly what she came to do. The drive back to the city was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was an alert from a legal monitoring service I used to track case developments. I read it once, read it again. "Jae-won," I said. He turned. I showed him the screen. The FCU had filed for an emergency asset freeze. Effective Monday morning, every Shin organization account, every holding company, every subsidiary, including at the very bottom of the list, Brightstone Cultural Holdings, including his mother's ceramics studio. He looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, not visibly, not in any way that someone who hadn't been watching him closely for 4 days would have caught. But something in the quality of his stillness shifted, the way a very calm body of water shifts when something moves far below the surface. "How long do we have?" he said. 48 hours, I said. "Maybe less if they move fast." He nodded once, looked out the window. Seoul was moving past us, indifferent and bright, going about it Saturday with no idea that in a glass tower and a hanok in Bukchon and a government office somewhere, a war was quietly beginning. "Then we start tonight," he said. "I'll need everything," I said. "Every document, every contact, every record I haven't seen yet. And Jae-won..." I waited until he looked at me. "If there's anything in those files that I'm not going to like..." "There is," he said simply. "Tell me now." He held my gaze for a long moment. The car moved through the city. Somewhere behind us, his mother was in her studio, shaping clay with steady hands, making things that were beautiful precisely because they were almost but not quite perfect. "My father," he said quietly, "did not build this company cleanly. When he died, I inherited a choice, burn it down or hold it together." He paused. "I held it together. And the things you did to hold it together," I said, "are what the FCU has." "Some of them," he said. I breathed in slowly, out slowly, the way I do before I walk into a courtroom. "All right," I said. "All right," he repeated. "I said I'd defend you," I said. I didn't say it would be easy. I said I'd do it." I looked at him steadily. "But you don't lie to me. Not once. Not about anything. If I ask you a question and you don't want to answer it, you tell me you're not answering it. But you do not lie to me. Those are my terms." He was quiet for a moment. "Those," said Shin Jae-won, "were not the original terms." "The original terms," I said, "did not include an emergency asset freeze. We're renegotiating." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Slow, deliberate, the beginning of that smile. The real one, the one that wasn't guarded or measured, that just existed because something had genuinely surprised it into being. "No lies," he said. "No lies," I confirmed. He held out his hand. I looked at it, the hand of a man who ran half of Seoul's shadow economy, who had inherited a kingdom built on things that didn't survive direct light, who had a mother who made ceramics and fed strangers and saw something in a bowl's imperfect rim that most people walked past. I shook it. His grip was firm and warm and ended exactly when it was supposed to, and he held my gaze for exactly 1 beat longer than the handshake required. "Camille," he said. "What?" "You have clay on your sleeve." I looked down. There was, in fact, a small smear of gray clay on my left cuff from the ceramic studio. I had walked into a professional renegotiation of terms with a crime lord with clay on my sleeve. "That," I said with great dignity, "is evidence of a site visit." Shin Jae-won laughed. Not a polite sound, not a controlled, measured sound. An actual laugh, short, real, surprised out of him, was the kind that only happens when something catches a person entirely off guard. It changed his whole face. It took the architecture of it, the sharp jaw, the dark eyes, the severity that sat on him like a second skin, and made it briefly, startlingly human. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then it was gone, and he was composed again, looking out the window, and I was looking at the clay on my sleeve, and the city moved around us, and the 48-hour clock was already running. I did not think about the laugh for the rest of the drive. I thought about it a very normal amount, professionally, the way you think about any data point that recalibrates your working model of a person. That was all. We arrived at the Shin Organization building at 4 in the afternoon. By 4:15, I was back in the conference room with the 11 boxes and a fresh legal pad and a coffee that arrived before I'd even asked for it. Black, the right temperature, with a note that said simply, "Tonight, we work." "JW," I wrote back. "Stop sending notes and come help with the boxes." He was in the conference room in 8 minutes. We worked until 2 in the morning. At one point, somewhere around midnight, he fell asleep in the chair across from me for exactly 23 minutes. I know because I checked. His head tipped back, his long legs stretched under the table, the severe lines of his face gone loose and unguarded in a way that was so unexpectedly different from every other version of him I'd seen that I stopped working for a moment. Just a moment. I put a post-it note on his forehead before I woke him up. Sorry, it said, "Snoring. Very unprofessional." He peeled it off, read it, and looked at me with eyes still half-weighted with sleep. "I don't snore," he said. "That is a lie," I said. "You said no lies." He crumpled the post-it, put it in his pocket, picked up his pen. "Back to work, counselor," he said. And that was when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Whatever he saw there did something to his face that I hadn't seen before. A quick, cold shift. All the warmth of the last 10 hours evacuating in a single second, leaving behind the man who ran empires and made problems disappear, not the man who laughed at clay on a sleeve. He stood, turned away from me, answered in a low, flat voice. The call lasted 45 seconds. He hung up, stood with his back to me for a moment, then he turned around, and his face was completely composed, and he said, in a voice that was very careful and very even, "There's something I need to tell you." I put my pen down. "The FCU's case," he said. "The emergency freeze. It didn't come from the investigation team." He paused. "It came from inside." "Inside the FCU?" "Inside my organization," he said. "Someone filed the information that triggered the emergency motion. Someone who has been in these offices, who has access to the documents you've been reading." His eyes held mine, steady and dark and absolutely unreadable. "Someone who knew you were here." The conference room was very quiet. I looked at the 11 boxes of documents around me, at the color-coded timeline on the glass wall, at the 7 pages of notes, my strategy, my arguments, my entire defense architecture, sitting in a stack on the table between us. "You're saying," I said slowly, "that someone inside your organization is trying to destroy you?" "Yes," he said, "and they know I'm your lawyer." "Yes, which means," I said, "they know what I know." He said nothing. He didn't need to. I looked at the files. I looked at my notes. I looked at Shin Jae-won standing across the conference table at 2 in the morning, composed and still and watching me with those dark, careful eyes. "Well," I said. I picked up my pen. "Then we have a lot more work to do." I found it at 4:17 in the morning. I want to be precise about the time because I feel it is important for the historical record that I, Camille Hayes, attorney at law, solved the most consequential legal puzzle of my career while running on 3 hours of sleep, cold coffee, and the quiet fury of a woman who had been lied to by a document. Not by Jae-won. The document itself. Specifically, a subsidiary filing from 4 years ago for a logistics company called Hanul Transit Solutions, which had been tucked into the 9th box, beneath 2 folders of Port Authority certifications and 1 completely inexplicable takeout menu that I chose not to examine further. The filing was dry. The filing was the kind of document that existed specifically to be overlooked, dense with accounting language, cross-referenced to 3 other filings, formatted in the particular font of bureaucratic inevitability. I had read it twice already and moved past it. The 3rd time, something snagged. I sat up straighter. I pulled the file closer. I read the paragraph again, slowly, the way you reread a sentence when your brain has registered something before your eyes have caught up to what it was. Hanul Transit Solutions had been flagged by the FCU as a shell company, a vehicle for moving money through the Shin organization's network without a visible destination. It was, in fact, the centerpiece of the FCU's entire case, the transaction hub that connected every other flagged account. Without Hanul, the FCU's argument collapsed to a collection of suggestive but ultimately defensible paperwork. With Hanul, they had a case. Except Hanul Transit Solutions had been registered, quietly, cleanly, buried in a footnote of a footnote, not under the Shin organization's holding structure. It had been registered under a separate private trust. A trust I had seen referenced exactly once before, in a different box, in a different folder, and had noted and moved past because at the time it had seemed peripheral. I grabbed box 4, dug through it, found the folder. The trust was called Cheongsan Private Holdings, established 6 years ago, one named trustee. I stared at the name. I read it again. I picked up my phone and called Jae-won. It was 4:18 in the morning. He answered on the 2nd ring, which told me he hadn't been sleeping either. Cheongsan Private Holdings, I said without preamble. Tell me that name means something to you. A silence. The particular kind of silence that means yes, it means something, and I am deciding how much to tell you. No lies, I said. He exhaled. It was my father's, a private trust he established before he died. I knew it existed. I didn't know what was in it. After he died, his lawyers told me it had been dissolved. It wasn't dissolved, I said. It's been active for 6 years, and Hanul Transit, the company the FCU is using as the centerpiece of their entire case, is registered under it. I paused, letting that land. Jae-won, you didn't build Hanul. You didn't register it. You've never had signatory authority over it. The FCU has been building a case against you for a company you don't legally own and never did. Another silence, longer this time. Who is the trustee? He said. I looked at the name on the page. Oh, I said, this is going to be a very interesting morning. The trustee's name was Kwon Dae-sik. Kwon Dae-sik, who was 63 years old, who had been the Shin organization's chief financial officer for 19 years, who had attended Jae-won's father's funeral in the front row and wept with what everyone had apparently taken to be genuine grief, and who had, with extraordinary patience and a filing cabinet full of meticulous documentation, spent 6 years quietly building a parallel financial structure underneath the Shin organization's feet, waiting for the moment to pull it into the light. Not to destroy Jae-won exactly, to replace him. The FCU's investigation had not been an external threat. It had been a delivery mechanism. Kwon had fed them the information. Kwon had timed the emergency asset freeze. The plan, as best I could reconstruct it from the documents now spread across the entire conference room table, was elegant in the horrible way that truly committed betrayals always are. The FCU freezes Shin organization assets, the board panics, Jae-won is pushed out, and Kwon steps in as the stabilizing figure with clean hands and a ready solution. because he had spent 6 years making sure he was the solution. I explained all of this to Jae-won at 5 in the morning in the conference room with the city still dark outside and the documents arranged across every available surface like a map of someone's very bad life choices. He listened without interrupting. He stood at the glass wall where my color-coded timeline used to be. I had taken it down and replaced it with a new one, this one in red. And he listened to every word with the stillness of a man who was processing something that was going to require significant recalibration. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. 19 years, he said. Yes. He came to my father's funeral. I know. He taught me how to read a balance sheet. A pause. I was 15. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would be more useful than silence, so I offered the silence and let him stand in it for the seconds he needed. Then he straightened. His jaw set. The stillness shifted from processing to decided. A very specific transition I was learning to recognize in him, the moment the door to the quiet room closed and the man who ran an empire came back online. "What do we do?" he said. "We do not," I said. "Give Kwon or the FCU a single second more than we have to. The asset freeze hearing is Monday morning. We file a counter motion today and Saturday under emergency provisions, and we attach every document I found tonight. Hanul's registration, the trust records, the chain of filings that proves the FCU's centerpiece company has never been under your control." I picked up my legal pad. "The FCU isn't corrupt. They were used. When they see what they've actually been handed, they'll want off this case faster than we want them off it. Nobody wants to be the agency that built a 3-year investigation on fraudulent evidence supplied by the subject's own CFO. He looked at me. "You can file an emergency counter motion on a Saturday." "I can file anything anywhere at any time if the grounds are sufficient," I said. "Oh, these grounds are sufficient. I need a judge's emergency contact, a notary, and your signature on about 40 pages of documents in the next 2 hours. "I have all 3, he said. "Of course you do," I said. "Go wake up whoever you need to wake up. I'll have the filing ready in 90 minutes. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. He looked at me. At the disaster of documents, at the red timeline, at the legal pad covered in my handwriting, at the cold coffee sitting forgotten at my elbow. And something moved across his face that wasn't the guarded thing and wasn't the amusement and wasn't the composed executive expression. It was something quieter and more direct than all of those. Something that looked a great deal like the face a person makes when they realize, in the middle of a very complicated night, that they are not actually alone in it. "Camille," he said. 90 minutes, I said, without looking up from the page. "Go." He went. I wrote faster than I had ever written in my professional life, which is saying something because I once drafted a 40-page injunction in a Nairobi hotel bathroom during a power outage using my phone as a flashlight. The motion was tight, precise, and devastating in the way that good legal writing is devastating. Not dramatic, just relentlessly, surgically correct. I cited every document. I cross-referenced every filing. I constructed paragraph by careful paragraph an argument that didn't ask the court to believe anything. It simply laid out what the records said and allowed the conclusion to be unavoidable. The FCU had been handed a manufactured case. The real architecture of fraud belonged to Kwon Disick, and every day the asset freeze stood was another day an innocent 71-year-old woman's ceramic studio was collateral damage in someone else's power grab. I put Brightstone Cultural Holdings in the final paragraph. I am not above emotional precision. The counter motion was filed at 7:22 a.m. By 10 o'clock, the FCU's lead counsel had called Jae-won's phone, which Jae-won handed wordlessly to me because I was his lawyer and that was how this worked. The call lasted 6 minutes. I spoke for approximately 4 of them. The FCU's counsel spoke for the other 2 in the careful, clipped tones of a person dismantling their own position with professional dignity while internally experiencing something considerably less dignified. By noon, the emergency asset freeze had been suspended pending review. By 2 in the afternoon, I had received formal confirmation that the FCU was opening a separate investigation into Kwon Dasik and Cheongsan Private Holdings. By 2:15, Kwon Dasik had stopped answering his phone, which told me his own lawyers had found him first and told him what was coming. I put my phone face down on the conference room table. I looked at the 11 boxes of documents that I had been living inside for 4 days. I looked at the red timeline on the glass wall. I looked at the post-it notepad that had, over the course of this week, become something between a communication system and a sport. I wrote on a post-it, "Asset freeze suspended. Kwon under investigation. Your mother's ceramics are safe. You're welcome." I stuck it to the top of box 1. Then I put my blazer on, gathered my things, and was almost at the door when Jae-won came through it. He stopped. I stopped. We looked at each other in the doorway of the conference room, him coming in, me going out, the 11 boxes behind me and the city behind him through the glass wall of the corridor. He had seen the post-it. He was holding it. "You're leaving," he said. "Case is resolved," I said. "Professionally speaking, the FCU will want depositions in the coming weeks and I'll need to prep you for those, but the immediate crisis is Camille. Handled, and I think we should discuss Camille. Retainer terms for the ongoing Camille." His voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the voice he used when he had decided something and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. "It is stop talking about the case." I stopped. He looked at me. I looked at him. The post-it was still in his hand. The strip on his nose was almost completely gone now, just the faintest shadow of a bruise yellowing at the edges, the last evidence of the worst and best decision I had ever made in a nightclub corridor. "My mother called this morning," he said. "About the ceramics. About you," he said. "She called to tell me that she liked you, which from my mother is approximately equivalent to a state honor." He paused. "She also told me that if I let you leave Seoul without doing something about it, she would stop making me birthday soup." I blinked. "Birthday soup? It's a whole thing. Very important. I have strong feelings about it." He took one step toward me. "The point is that my mother, who has been correct about everything for 71 years, has made her position clear." "And what's your position?" I said. He considered this for a moment. Seriously, genuinely, the way he considered everything, with that total stillness that I had spent a week learning to read. Then he reached past me, took the post-it pad from the conference room table, wrote something, and held it out. I took it. It said, "Have dinner with me, not a professional visit." Yeah, I looked at it for a long moment. "This," I said, "is a very small piece of paper for a very significant question." "I work with the materials available," he said. "I broke your nose," I said. "Intentionally," he agreed. "I remember. I have feelings about it." "Good feelings or bad feelings?" "Camille," he said. And the way he said my name, the way he had said it from the very first time, like it was a word worth keeping, made something shift in my chest that I had been professionally ignoring for 4 days and was running low on the energy to keep ignoring. I run the largest criminal organization in Seoul. I have had people try to kill me 11 times. I have never once looked forward to coming to work until this week. He paused. I look forward to coming to work very much this week. I looked at the post-it. I looked at him. I looked at the 11 boxes of documents that had, over the past 4 days, become the backdrop of something I hadn't planned for and had absolutely no legal framework to manage. "If I say yes," I said, "I need it on record that this is not a pattern. I do not typically have dinner with clients." "Noted," he said. Or respond to note passing." "You responded to every note. That was professional communication. You drew a small star on the third one." I had, in fact, drawn a small star on the third one. I had been tired. It had slipped out. "That was a punctuation mark," I said. "Of course," he said gravely. I folded the post-it and put it in my blazer pocket. "Fine," I said. "Dinner, but I'm choosing the restaurant." "Naturally," he said, "and you're paying." "Obviously," he said. "And if you send a car without telling me first, I'll text," he said, "like a person." "Good," I said. I moved toward the door and he stepped aside. All the way aside this time with a sweep of his arm and a look in his eyes that was warm and dry and, underneath both of those things, something that didn't have a professional name and didn't need one. I walked past him, into the corridor, towards the elevator. "Camille," he called after me. I didn't stop walking. "What?" "You have a post-it stuck to your back." I reached back. There was, in fact, a post-it stuck to my blazer. I peeled it off. It said in handwriting I now recognized instantly, "The exit is that way. J.W." I turned around. He was leaning against the conference room door frame, arms crossed, that rare and real smile sitting openly on his face, the one that changed the whole architecture of him, that made him briefly and completely human. "You wrote that before I turned around," I said. "I had high hopes," he said. I pointed at him. He raised his hands slightly, unoffended. I turned and walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I stood there with the post-it in my hand and the city spread out behind me through the glass, and 4 days of documents and cold coffee and clay on my sleeve and birthday soup and a mother who approved, and a laugh I had thought about for a professionally normal amount of time. The elevator opened. I got in. Just before the doors closed, I heard him, from down the corridor, unhurried and certain. "Saturday, Camille." The doors closed. I looked at the post-it in my hand. I looked at my reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. Camille Hayes, attorney at law, who had come to Seoul for a career and found a case, and then found something else entirely in a nightclub corridor at the end of a very bad Thursday, when she had planted her feet and decided, for reasons she'd been explaining to herself ever since, that enough was enough. The elevator descended. 38 floors of Shin Jae-won's empire, floor by floor. I smiled. It was a small smile, a private one, the kind you allow yourself when no one is watching and the situation has officially become something you didn't see coming and couldn't have planned for and are, against all professional judgment, completely glad about. I put the post-it in my pocket with the other one. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the cool marble lobby, the city waiting beyond the glass doors, Seoul in the afternoon light, all noise and motion and 10,000 ordinary lives going about their ordinary business. I walked out. I had a restaurant to choose. 6 months later, Shin Jae-won's case was formally closed when the FCU reached a settlement with the Shin organization's legal team, led on record by one Camille Hayes, that resulted in 0 charges, a complete unfreezing of assets, and a separate indictment filed against Kwon Dasik on 14 counts of financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and the spectacular audacity of trying to dismantle an empire from the inside using someone else's lawyer. Kwon's own attorney, I heard through professional channels, had requested a change of venue 3 times. I felt no sympathy. Brightstone Cultural Holdings was formally audited, found to be exactly what it claimed, a ceramics foundation run by a 71-year-old woman with very strong opinions and an excellent doenjang jjigae, and granted a cultural arts commendation by the Seoul city government, which Shin Yeon-ja accepted with the gracious satisfaction of a woman who had never doubted this outcome for a single moment. She gave me the celadon bowl, the small one, with the imperfect rim. She pressed it into my hands on a Sunday afternoon in her courtyard and said something that Jae-won, standing beside me with his hands in his pockets, translated as, "For the woman who looked before she said beautiful." I kept it on my desk. Lim and Associates, having observed the outcome of the Shin case, offered me a partnership. I negotiated the terms myself, naturally. As for Jae-won, Shin Jae-won, who ran half of Seoul's shadow economy and had a mother who made ceramics and had once been headbutted in a nightclub corridor by a foreign lawyer who'd had a bad Thursday and excellent bone density, he remained, officially, a former client. Unofficially, he was the man who texted before sending a car, who still occasionally left notes on my desk that said things like, "You've been in that file for 4 hours. Go home and my mother is asking if you're coming Sunday," who had stopped wearing the guarded expression approximately 3 months in and had never fully put it back on, who laughed, really laughed, the surprised kind, the kind that changed his whole face, more often than he would probably admit to anyone in his professional life. He still had a faint shadow on the bridge of his nose, just barely visible in certain light. I noticed it, sometimes. He noticed me noticing. Neither of us said anything about it. We didn't need to. The end. Thank you for listening. If this story found you at the right moment, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.